I'm sitting here with a treasure trove of things that are wartime mementos, and the author of the book and the story behind all of this, Michael Pungercar, The Promise Kept, the story of your dad. Again, I'm finding so many stories about after your father passes away. Then you find out a certain number of things. And what is your story with your dad? Who was he?
Well, my dad grew up in Wisconsin, hometown boy in Sheboygan, and then the war broke out, and he wanted to enlist right away after Pearl Harbor. But my grandfather had had a stroke, and my dad was working as the oldest son, the breadwinner, so my grandma wouldn't let him enlist until he came back in '42 and said if he enlisted in the Army, he could bring home more money than he was making at his factory job. So she let him enlist, not out of patriotic reasons, but to help support the family. And my dad went in the Army Air Corps as a mechanic, did not like working as a mechanic on planes, saw a posting for radio operators. And this was a man that dropped out of school his sophomore year in high school to go support the family during the Depression. Went through 16-week class in Scottsfield, Illinois, and learned how to become a radio operator. And that included learning the radio repairs, the radio codes, Morse code. He was assigned to a B-17 crew. They did their flight training in Louisiana. Was shipped overseas, got to fly the polar route, going up through Iceland and into Wales. Was put on a train with his group and assigned to the 91st Bomb Group, 8th Air Force. He was stationed in Bassingbourn, England. And he ended up flying 30 combat missions over Germany.
And he was wounded as well.
He wasn't wounded per se. He probably could have gotten the Purple Heart, but he was hit by a piece of flak on one mission and ended up with a real bad bruised ribs and stuff along the under the arm in the armpit area.
Matter of fact, I think we have that here.
That is the piece of flak that hit him. If it would have been a direct shot through the plane, he probably would have been killed instantly. But it either ricocheted or was somewhat spent. It almost knocked him out. And he said he couldn't raise his arm for almost 2 weeks because of the bruising and stuff. But if that had been a direct hit, I wouldn't be here talking with you today.
Tell me about the other things in this particular box.
Well, when he passed away and we were cleaning out his attic, a lot of this material, which we thought had been lost years before, turned up in an old suitcase, old heavy cardboard suitcase with leather strapping around it. We opened it up. And inside that suitcase, there was like a candy tin. When I opened it up, there was his dog tags, his wings, his air medal, the piece of flak, black and white pictures. In the suitcase itself was a bunch of papers from World War II. That's my dad's air medal. Airmen that flew got that air medal after 5 combat missions. My dad ended up with 6 oak leaf clusters for the ribbon on that air medal, one for each 5 missions, first 30 missions.
And what about the picture that you brought?
This is a picture of my dad with his crew when they got to England, and they're under the nose of a plane that they got to name. It was a brand new B-17, and his plane, his crew named it Peace or Bust. And my dad is in the back row, second from the left, the short guy in the back row. And I found that in the suitcase as well. And on the back of that picture is the name of each of the crew members and where they came from. So finding this information when my dad passed away led me to wanting to do more research, and it really goes back. When I was a kid growing up, he was like most World War II veterans, didn't talk about it. One time in high school, he took me up in the attic, showed me a box, and he showed me his wings, his dog tags, started sharing a couple stories, and then got this faraway look and stopped talking. And I look back now years later and realize he was dredging up some memories that he didn't want to recall. When he was 79 years old, I went back to Wisconsin, took him on a fishing trip, and driving back home, all of a sudden he just opened up and said, you know, I remember when I enlisted in the Army Air Corps in '42, and for an hour he talked steady, had me laughing, had me crying. And I finally said, Dad, you have to cut a tape and share these stories. Nobody else in the family knows this stuff. About 5 months later, a tape showed up, my years in the Army Air Corps, 1942 to 45. And I was working full time. I put it on a shelf in my office and, you know, I'll get to it. Well, 2 years later, cancer took Dad. And I had promised him I would transcribe that tape. So I sat down after he passed away, and we had found all this material in the attic, and I transcribed the tape, had 12 pages written up, and 100 questions I wanted to ask him. And it was with my wife's encouragement that I got on the internet. I found out that the 91st Bomb Group had a web ring. I sent them emails and started corresponding with some of their members. A gentleman in Illinois sent me an email asking for more information off the dog tags. I got my dad's serial number. He sent me back a spreadsheet with a list of his 30 missions, who the pilot of the plane was. It was a treasure trove, and I just started doing research, traveling, meeting other veterans, some that had served at the same base in Bassingbourn, England as my dad. And 3 years later, that transcript is part of The Promise Kept.
Why the title, The Promise Kept?
I thought about the title for the book, and it kept going back to the fact that I had promised my dad I would share that story. And of course, it's more than my dad's story. That transcript is woven throughout the book, but 7 other veterans of the 8th Air Force that all served in World War II, 3 of them actually served at the same base as my dad, did not know him personally. But they allowed me to share their stories as well in the book and provided me with photos from their collections. And it was a journey that I just grew so much from. I traveled a lot, and I used to complain about being stuck in the middle seat on a plane for a 2-hour flight. And now I'm thinking of my dad on 10, 11-hour flights on oxygen at 40 below zero, 25,000 feet in combat. I'm not going to complain about being stuck in the middle seat anymore.
I love the story at the end where you actually get to fulfill one of your own dreams. Tell us about that. And it is part of this picture.
Yes, that is a picture of a B-17 that I got to fly on, and that formed the epilogue for the book. That plane is called the Aluminum Overcast. It's operated by the Experimental Aircraft Association out of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and it tours the country, one of 5 B-17s that are still flyable. And I signed up to go on a flight. I told my wife, I said, I've won, I think it was 2009 or something like that. I said, I want to fly on a B-17 this year. And they charge you for that. But I called and got a reservation to fly in the plane. It came into Oregon up at Hillsboro Airport. They let me fly in the radio operator seat for takeoff and landing. So I got to experience the takeoff and landing just like my dad did for probably 80, 90 times with practice flights and combat missions and training and everything else. It was quite an experience.
And that is The Promise Kept, too.
That's the way I closed the book. It's a journey that's changed my life. In meeting these veterans, one of them in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, asked me if I heard about the Honor Flight program, which is a program nationally that raises money to take veterans back to Washington, D.C. to see their memorials, and it starts with the World War II veterans because of their age. Again, according to the Honor Flight program, we're losing right now 600 to 700 World War II veterans a day across the country. The veterans that we're transporting, the youngest World War II veteran right now that I've met is 89 years old. The oldest one is 97. And we keep losing them. The hard part of working in this Honor Flight program is getting to meet these veterans and getting to know them and then going to their celebration of life because they're passing away.
As I was reading this book, I was so struck by how he had put so much into what he did. I feel I know him, and that's what I love about reading these books, is I now feel I know this person and what they went through, what their teams went through, what dangers they faced, and I'm just so glad you wrote it.
Well, like I say, it was a life-changing experience for me. I think I got to know my dad a lot better in reading what he did, and I see what he did in World War II carrying through for the rest of his life. Again, he didn't talk about the war, but my dad was the kind of guy that if he made up, if he wanted to do something, he did it. When he was working at a power plant, they had posting for instrument man. He went to the library, bought books, studied, learned the math involved and stuff, became an instrument man. Did the same thing to become an electrician. I always like to say my dad was the I can't remember the same right now, but where he was a master of all. Everything he tried to do, he did, and he was good at everything he did. I wish I'd have learned some of the skills that he developed in life, but writing the book was just a great gift to me.
I'm glad this didn't take him.
So am I.
And I'm glad that you wrote his story for all of us.
Well, again, it's not just his story. The air war over Europe was a big part of World War II, and we were losing airmen a lot earlier in the war than before D-Day. And the thing I want people to realize is the 8th Air Force in particular lost, I think it was 26,000 airmen, with another 28,000 that were taken as prisoner of war. And that doesn't count the tens of thousands that were wounded on their missions. The 8th Air Force lost more airmen than the Marine Corps lost in all their battles in the Pacific in World War II. So it's a part of the World War II history that I want people to remember, and that was one of the reasons for writing the book. The book is about World War II, and again, that was sadly, in doing my research, the last war this country fought to win, and also the last war where this country as a whole was united behind the war effort. Everybody in this country participated in World War II, whether it was raising crops, working in the factories, gathering string and aluminum foil. I mean, everybody participated and made sacrifices.
The Promise Kept by Michael Pungercar. Thank you so much for joining us
Appreciate
today.
being here.